Next, I'm going to introduce our special guest speaker, the Honorable Minister Pam Parsons of Women and Gender Equality. Now, Minister Parsons could not make it here in person today, and she sends her regrets, but she has provided us with a few words that she would like me to read on her behalf. Thank you for the kind invitation to attend today's summit. I was so very much looking forward to being there. However, due to the delivery of the provincial budget, I'm unable to attend. The Office of Women and Gender Equality views inclusion and diversity as crucial aspects of our province's workplace culture. So it is important that we recognize the significance of embracing individuals from all walks of life. Inclusion and diversity in the workplace from the perspective of women and gender diverse individuals is essential for fostering a culture of equality and respect. Our government is committed to working to reduce the systemic barriers to the participation of women and gender diverse individuals in our economy, and we are taking steps to increase participation. This province is welcoming more newcomers than ever before, thanks to our ongoing global recruitment, recognized humanitarian responses to helping refugees, such as those arriving from the Ukraine and Afghanistan, and a commitment to effective settlement. Employers are essential to our success in attracting and retaining newcomers. 73% of permanent, see, this is what happens come the end of the day. 73% of permanent residents are economic immigrants, settling down and working here, helping to meet an evolving labor demand. As we grow more diverse, we are becoming better at ensuring that newcomers that we attract here settle down, raise families, help grow our economy, and sustain our communities. Let us celebrate our differences and recognize our shared humanity and strive to build a future where every individual can thrive. Thank you, Honorable Pam Parsons. Now, our last event today is another panel discussion. This panel discussion is on diversity and inclusion. So I'll give us a bit of backdrop here. And our afternoon panel has been sponsored by the Anna Templeton Center for Craft, Art, and Design. Thank you. So our second panel is talking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Most of us are, of course, familiar with these terms, but we have invited community members to discuss these topics further today. As of 2021, 26.5% of Canada's population identify as belonging to a visible minority group, with 3.4% of those individuals residing in Newfoundland and Labrador. Over recent years, diversity and inclusion discussions and education initiatives have increased dramatically in the province, but more work needs to be done to support all equity groups. This panel is moderated by Megan Felt from McInnes. Again, hi, Megan, and thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and as I say your name, come on up to our big comfy couch. Laura Bell Mba. Laura Bell. Come on up, Laura Bell. Hello, thank you. TJ Jones from Full Picture Management. And also, apologies, Laura Bell has Race to Dinner ongoing. It says activist. Leah Farrell from the Autism Association of Newfoundland. Deepa Riza from the Association of New Canadians. And Cole Kippenhuck, member of the Indigenous community. Cole? Alrighty. And again, folks, we'll have some questions at the end, but feel free to email your questions as well.
Right. Hi, everyone. You're going to be sick of me by the end of today. But I promise I'll give our panelists lots of time to speak, so you won't just be hearing from me. So thank you for the introduction. The only thing I'll say, here is, there's an interesting statistic that I kind of, actually, I think Dr. Tony Chang actually mentioned it earlier today as well, but Stats Canada has, in 2022 or last year, has said that, or has provided information that 26% of the working population in Canada has self-identified as a visible minority. And they're predicting that by 2036, that number will increase to 39%. So that's a pretty incredible increase in just about 13 years. And as an immigration lawyer, but also as someone who's, born and raised and lived almost my entire life here in Newfoundland, I can say that over the last 10 to 15 years, and even more specifically in the last 5 to 6 or 7 years, there's been an absolute great increase in in immigration or increase of people from all over the world coming here and living and establishing in this province. And, employers and other organizations are going to have to, adjust their policies and their practices, to create more inclusive communities for these people. And there's been a lot of things done over the last few years. There's a lot of movement in the area, but there's definitely more that can be done as well. So some of the things we're going to talk about today on this panel from our, individuals here, are just, some of the challenges and some of the, the things that organizations and organizations and communities are doing to help in this regard. So I'm going to start out with the first question, and it's just a kind of a straightforward one to get us started off. But what does workplace diversity and inclusion mean to you? So does anyone want to start us off?
So to me, workplace diversity and inclusion I separate the two. So diversity for me is the visual aspect of it. So a lot of organizations do the pretty picture that goes on the website that has people of different ethnicities and abilities visually represented. And sometimes that's a reality. Other times it's the wonderful work of Google and stock photos. And then inclusion for me is once you actually get into the organization, when you go from that pretty picture to how the individuals who are employed by the organization feel like they can show up. So do they actually feel like they're checking parts of themselves at the door just to go in for their 9 to 5 to do the thing, get the paycheck and go home? Or do they get to show up as themselves wholly, good days, bad days, and present who they are in their entirety and authentically? So sometimes that does happen, and other times you are asked to fit into a nice little box to fit the corporate culture, and that is inclusive as it gets.
All right. Just to piggyback on what was just said by my wonderful colleague here, is that inclusion at a workplace means to accept the differences. It means to embrace what every individual is going to bring to the table by listening to them. It means for me to value those different lenses, the different representations, the experiences, what the academics or even their upbringing or their faiths and their own beliefs. To embrace that, to listen to that, to value that, and to make sure that they're comfortable to work within those scopes at the workplace and not feel uncomfortable at any point of time or not feel confident enough or empowered enough to speak up or share their thoughts, concerns, and so on and so forth.
Agree with all of that. And I would also say inclusion is action. It's okay to have the plans and to have the policy, but if it's not in action, then it doesn't mean anything. So, universal design is a big topic of conversation in the disability community. So what are you doing within that framework in action,
Great. Anyone else want to share? We can move on to the next question. Yeah, one more thing. Yeah.
I just wanted to mirror some of the thoughts that John was sharing earlier, the idea of integration. How about we decenter all of the Catholic holidays? There should be access for folks that practice other religions, that have different cultural backgrounds, to be able to observe that and not have to vote for, can I take a personal day to observe my culture and my religion? I think maybe that's another side of that integration piece that John was speaking of.
Yeah, it'll be interesting in the coming years to see if that kind of thing changes, because society as a whole is changing in that regard, at least hopefully. So the next question, are going to talk about some of the challenges. So what are some common challenges you see to advancing diversity and inclusion in this province?
A lack of understanding, I think, is what it comes down to. And including disability within the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations. I feel like in the room today, there was a lot of conversation around disability. So I feel like the conversation is alive and well, but it's also ensuring that it's within everybody's plan and policies as well. But I think in terms of the province for disability specifically, because, coming from the Autism Society, I'm not autistic myself, but I have an autistic son and I work in the community. It's just making sure that the representation is there for sure.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think from an Indigenous lens and also from a queer lens and from an intersectionality lens, those are the challenges. Like those intersectionalities aren't necessarily lifted up. And similar to this idea of policy without action or inclusion that becomes very awareness-day focused, it's sort of these good intentions, but they aren't actually structurally embedded. And when we talk about like anti-oppressive or decolonial type work, what does that actually look like? Most groups really don't know. And so it takes that really intersectional lens to come in. So the biggest challenge I see is groups that want awareness training, but not structural change. And there's
They
a
want to
difference.
check the box, but they don't actually do anything about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I think there's also, as humans, we have this idea of perfection being the ideal. When it comes to this work, there's a lot of fear over making mistakes. And if you get canceled, if you don't do it right, what does that mean? And we are also most humans are against change. No one likes to have to change something they've gotten really used to, something they've gotten really comfortable with, especially if it has served them well and put them in a position of privilege. So there's that whole challenging privilege, fear of canceling if they don't get it right. And then what does this mean for longstanding change? Will I still get the things that I'm accustomed to receiving? And do I have to change who I am to make other people comfortable?
Really, really good points. Anyone else want to add to that one? Yeah.
I'm going to be this person.
TJ, right? TJ, yeah.
It's at the end. I think one of the other challenges that we see is that there isn't a lot of structural support for this work. A lot of the time in different organizations, it's handed off to the minority hire, for lack of a better phrase. It's handed off to the local queer person or the local trans person to say, shouldn't you want to do this work? Shouldn't you be grateful for this opportunity, as opposed to having it actually be supported by the organization beyond it just be an extra set of tasks on the side of that person's desk? So I think that's another issue. We haven't really caught up with other jurisdictions around actually having DEI or EDI professionals specifically, focused on that work within our organizations.
And lastly, compensation. When investing the money in the like when you do your financial planning for the year, actually putting it in your budget that you're allocating this a certain amount of funds to do the work, and be aware of the cost of doing this work. It is not inexpensive labor. It is not an honorarium at the end of the day. These people are they are well educated, both lived experience and academics in this profession. So you actually have to pay for the quality of work you want to see in your organization.
And I guaranteed you'll see a guaranteed return on that investment.
Absolutely.
Right. So, anyone else want to comment on that before we go into unconscious bias, which is always an interesting topic? So my next question is with regard to unconscious bias. So what is unconscious bias to you, and how do you feel it impacts team dynamics and decision-making in your organizations?
I'd love to jump in on this one. One of the things I'll start with is, and even thinking of some of the things when I was here earlier, the idea of the language of vulnerabilities, where it's like these intersections or these things about me are not what make me vulnerable. I am not a vulnerable person. It is the capitalist colonial system I am trying to show up in that puts me at risk. So I think these unconscious biases are the conditioning of colonialism, of capitalism, of this idea to what the actual value is. So that pieces that for me turn this into hierarchy, and how staff are not looked at as the knowledge keepers that they are. And instead we have this idea that we're supposed to look up the ladder to get the answers when really the knowledge is usually already around the circle. And in doing that, then it becomes that people get left out. And then when we get left out, it's kind of like the idea of looking around the room here. Who's not here? Like, that's the questions we need to ask. And then who should be here and how do we get them here? And it doesn't become the emotional labor of the one, like you said, the one queer person, the one Indigenous person to have to do all of that work.
I know it can show up in an underestimation or even an overestimation of somebody's abilities sometimes. If some, stereotypical autistic, and I know Ange, thank you for saying earlier, she said about we're not all code breakers, which I thought was a really great point because one autistic person is one autistic person, just like every individual. So there can be an overassumption of, okay, this person will be great at this role, or okay, no, I don't think that person can do that role because of this, this, and this. So it's really making sure that we're understanding what people's capabilities are, but also what their interests are, also what they're not interested in, and meeting them with their supports and where the supports are needed.
Anyone else? Move on. Okay, the next question is about effective strategies and best practices. So what are some of these effective strategies and practices of diversity and inclusion in the workplace that you are seeing or have experienced?
Sure, I'd like to jump in on this one. This is going to go back to a comment made earlier from Fortis, where they were talking about what gets measured gets done. I think the first step for a lot of organizations, community groups, whether you're for-profit, not-for-profit, as long as you've organized in some form or manner, is evaluating what's already in the room. Evaluating, because diversity looks different depending on your organization. So if you are a majority woman-run, women-employed organization, diversity is not women at the table. Diversity might be racialized people at the table, might be queer folks at the table. Diversity looks different depending on what you are. So it's looking at what you have, what is not there, and what you are able to do. And be smart about it, not smart as in intellectually, but like the acronym SMART. You have to be specific, you have to be actionable, measurable, and tangible in all those ways. And start small. You cannot, I know we want to overhaul the system and go all the way in and all 10 toes down for it. Those are not sustainable ways to go through change. It doesn't work that way because if you go in really hot and fast, by the time you're midway through and you've hit the 10th obstacle, you're looking around being like, is this even really worth it? So start with little things. Be consistent in that change and build upon what you've already started. And I think that's one of the best ways for the strategy.
Anyone else like to weigh in a little bit? Yeah.
To once again piggyback on what Laura Bell said, I think trainings and workshops for sure are the key or the place to start with these things, and to take feedback on the trainings themselves and how it made everyone feel is a great way to acknowledge and to make those changes effective while moving forward. If you want to stay consistent, you need to understand what are the changes, what are the things that need to be in place to move forward. I know that by nature, we are an organization where we work with a very diverse group, both internal and external. And the series of workshops and trainings that we've had with the Autism Society for the 2S LGBTQIA plus community and much more has definitely helped bring diversity, inclusion at the workplace, and it's made people more comfortable. It's made them more confident. So it's something that needs to be consistent for sure.
One of the things that I think around best practices, I like this idea, the concept of using, it's from a partner of mine, they use it as a way to sort of deconstruct when we talk about trauma-informed things that we tend to leave from almost from a negative, even though we need to understand, like both things can exist at the same time of gaining understanding, but looking at taking things where we lead with resiliency and resistance and reclamation. And so when it's always led from those places where we lift up, so that we then start to see diversity and inclusion as a positive within everything that we do. I think sometimes bringing in outside help to help restructure organizations, like I think many consultants, myself included, because we can really come in and see things in a different way. And then this expression that I love, it's basically from the world I live in, where we talk about how we decolonize from the triangle, the hierarchies into the circles. But I also heard this new term is called flattening your organization. And so there's a lot of really interesting philosophies in that as well. So I think there's a lot of great things that are out there that are happening that we can build on.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to be as universal in your approach as possible. A lot of people are really overwhelmed of how do we encapsulate all of the different types of diversity? How do we start this process and not leave out one particular community or further exclude another? Be as universal as you can, be as general as you can with language. Just as a very specific takeaway for gender diverse workers, think about developing a workplace transition plan. It's something that outlines the specifics and the expectations of everybody involved in supporting a transitioning worker. That's a bit more of a tangible takeaway. But these are something that I think a lot of the businesses that I've been working with are very, very curious about. It's a really helpful strategy. It helps you do the thinking and how to best support a person who's transitioning their gender before you have to do it, before you have to navigate the process. So do the homework before you're in panic mode and crisis mode and you're like scrambling and where's Tej? I don't know what to do. Do the work first so that you have it there, so that you also have that organizational competency and comfort in being able to actually put that to work and make it work for you.
Proactive instead of reactive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Much
Anyone
more
else?
succinct.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to add to that before we go to the next question, which is really basically just building on the question I just asked. So this question asks, what methods can be employed to create a culture where all employees feel valued and respected? So a little bit more about culture and less about best practices.
I like a lot of open door policies within organizations where people can go into places and have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations with people where it's a safer space, again, safe space, a safer space where you can challenge ideas and ideals that have already been in the organization for a while. And then taking feedback, because sometimes as humans, when you hear that you've caused harm, it sucks. Let's just be very honest. A lot of us go into the world wanting to be good people, do good things. And when someone tells you, I know your intention, but the impact was way out to lunch, it's a hard thing to take in. So if we can take it, realize that making a mistake doesn't make you a horrible person. You're human, you make mistakes, but be earnest about taking the correction and learning and growing from it, I think is the way we begin to build that culture where people can feel safe to have these conversations, just show up authentically, because they know if I tell you you hurt me, you're not going to take it as a negative thing and stop interacting with me. You're going to take it as, okay, I made a mistake. Let's build, let's do better, let's move.
Be open to constructive criticism. I'm really good at succinctly putting together.
Yeah. And I think
Someone's taking
a lot of things that we talk about that we want to see in policy, then what does that actually tangibly look like? Like I'm big about harm reduction, but how we actually see harm reduction come to life in organizations or business, then it gets tricky. People aren't sure where to go to with it. So I think like transparency, that like you said, we're all in a place of learning. If we can always stay in that idea that we want to learn together, decide together, move forward together, plan together, like the word there being the togetherness, right? So it starts to, again, break down these sort of systems where the people making decisions aren't really the ones who know exactly or actually what's happening on the ground.
Anyone else like to chime in?
Just collaborate over prescribe. I'm taking a page out of your book. That was only 3 words.
Time, we only have one question left, but so the next question, and it's the last question on our panel today, and it deals with, the question relates to intersectionality, which is a kind of a buzzword today at today's conference, I would say. And the question is, how do various aspects of identity intersect in the workplace, and why is it important to consider intersectionality in diversity and inclusion efforts?
Oh, I love this question. Intersectionality is one of my favorite aspects of this work. And so I'm going to use myself as the subject for this one. So when I walk into a space, the identities that people see about me are that I'm a woman and that I'm Black. What they don't see is that I'm also queer. So when people are trying to build inclusive practices, if you only base it on what you can tell about an individual, you are automatically eliminating aspects of themselves that you don't know about. So I think when we're talking about creating more inclusive, diverse spaces, allow people to tell you who they are. Don't decide for them who they are and thus saying, this is how we're going to treat you and this is what we're going to do because I think you're this. And also, our identities are not monolith. Just because I'm Black, my Black identity is very specific to being a Nigerian immigrant, moved to Canada at a certain point in my life, which is very different than someone who is a Black Canadian born and raised. And so you have to give people the opportunity to tell you, this is how my identity shows up. This is how the world reflects it back at me. This is what you can do to support me as I navigate these spaces. And if they tell you, believe them at what they say. Do not decide for them what is valid, and accept all aspects of themselves. Don't make them check one part of them and be like, this is the only part we're going to cater to at this point in time. Because if you only cater to my womanhood in an organization, you ignore the fact that my Blackness has tons of barriers it has to overcome. You forget that my queerness, though it's not outwardly presenting, has barriers it has to overcome. So you have to celebrate all of me in order for me to feel accepted as an individual within an organization.
Yes, the over assuming, like starting to assume what people's identities are based on what you see in presentation, or the idea of like, so we get away from this tokenism where it isn't, oh, okay, well, you can speak for all people, right? There's under the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Two-Spirit Plus a National Action Plan. There's a sub-working group that came off from that. That's the 2S LGBTQIA plus sub-working group, and they developed a model for gender-based analysis plus intersectionality that goes so well beyond the federal and provincial view of that takes in like traditional or learned knowledge. It takes in ceremony. It takes in culture. It takes in gender inclusivity well past the binary. And I think that's a part of it for me, is that how we work together within an organization or within a community is to understand everybody's coming in with multiple different intersectionality points. It's not their responsibility to educate you on all of them. But if you find ways to engage where we break down barriers, and I think that is a way that it gets lifted up and we get more perspectives on the work that we do.
And I think that's the reason why it's so important in community to not stay in our silos, because we need to make sure that the collaboration that we talked about, that the open communication, that the feedback is there, so that even though the Autism Society has an autism neurodiverse lens, we need to understand that autistics and people with disabilities span all races, all ages, so we need to make sure that we're open to those conversations and open to collaboration, communication, partnerships. And that's something that I know that community is really starting to move towards. We're not there where we're collaborating openly and freely yet, but we'll get there. And when it comes down to things like funding and grant writing and things, we could really be piggybacking off different projects that we're doing, and we could be working together in a much more seamless way to kind of get to a similar end, or one that kind of benefits multiple groups at once.
Anyone else like to add to that before we go to questions? Thank you, guys. So we are going to go some questions. And I know that we have some questions or some people attending online as well. So we're going to make sure we get to some of those as well. And I don't know if we want to give a start to anybody that's here. Yeah, I'll let you guys decide on that. Oh.
Thank you so much to the panelists. It's really, really good conversation. So there is a principle in the disability justice community that says nothing about us without us, which is this idea that, whenever we do something for a community, that it should be informed by the community itself, and it should be about their lived experiences that inform how we do this work. And so I guess my question is, how do you see that principle being applied in organizations? When that work is done well, like how does that look like?
Yeah. So I know for the Autism Society, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not an autistic individual. My life experience is the mother of an autistic individual. And so we make sure that we put it straight up on any kind of communication we have about hiring or recruiting process, that we will center autistic individuals, and that we will hire autistic individuals and prioritize that, because we know that we need to be, if we're not autistic ourselves, we need to be autistic informed and autistic led. And so we definitely, I will always take a step back. I'm the advocacy manager, so I'll always take a step back and listen to the community and go where they're leading us. So we're there as support being informed by our community. And so I know in our recruitment practices, we're just putting it straight out there that we will prioritize autistic and neurodiverse individuals. And, through then once somebody's hired, then it's meeting them where they're at in terms of accommodations that they need and individualized plans. And then continuous check-ins and openness to feedback and openness to sometimes those difficult conversations, because we don't always do things right. And when it comes to potential, human resource conversations or things like that, we need to be open to what that is. And we may not know, well, we know that we don't know everything, so we need to listen to the individual. So that's how we frame the Nothing About Us Without Us. Those of us who are in the organization who aren't autistic definitely take a step back and center autistic voices.
I think another successful way that I've seen it done is with the ERGs. So when you have employee relational groups where they say, these are the things that we've talked about in our community and how we're represented and what we're finding within those who are of this community within this organization. Here's our feedback. Do something with it. And then those are the times when I think it's been most successful, because one, you didn't hand the work out to them. They already saw what was going on. They presented you the issues. You've taken what they've said and you're implementing them. And then you go back to was it successful? You told us this was what was wrong. Did we actually solve the problem or didn't we?
But before we move, I'm this guy. I warned y'all, last minute person. Can I counter that with one of the challenges to the approach to that's being done is assuming that a face that looks like this can speak for all queer and trans people? No, just full stop. And I think that happens in a lot of different diversity work and EDI work where we think, hey, we've got this one person in our network. Maybe we're aware of the work that they're doing. Maybe that's where it's, on the consultants to develop that network and be able to say, hey, I might not be the best person. Sure, the revenue stream could appreciate it, but maybe I'm not the best person to do this work. And that's where that accountability can come into it. But I think that that's a challenge I've seen where sometimes it's, you're the palatable queer, so I'm going to come talk to you. And you're going to mirror back to me all the things that I want to hear already because you're white and you got a beard, right? So just going to throw that out there. Food for thought.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that idea of cross-cultural, when we all get in the circle, right? Like, that's what I love about Indigenous sharing circles, is that once we all get there, we have to hold the space and allow people to speak the way that they need to. And so it also allows us to hear without having to think what I need to say next. But in a cross-cultural way, we get to learn our commonalities as well as the differences. And we can, again, I'm big about these things can both exist at the same time. But then I think it allows us to have a different conversation. And I think of, for myself, hearing about resource development, hearing about immigration, hearing as an Indigenous person and how I see and value land. But I know there's similarities, but it means that we have to be having the conversations about how we build community together. Because if not, then the isolation comes, right? And then it becomes where we see some of the, and I do think in many ways it's still a colonial capitalist tactic to keep us separated. But when we get together, then we realize we do have connection to land, but we also know that we want to be able to have good communities, have healthy lives, have strong economics. But yeah, there is something to be said about the cross-cultural and cross-intersectional as well, because I think all abilities, there's so many different dynamics that we can learn from together.
Thank you. So my question is that we've seen EDI focus in a way that aims to prevent harm for socially identifiable groups. But based on your knowledge and experiences, how can we advance EDI for non-socially identified marginalized groups? Non-socially identifiable marginalized groups.
I think it's in the E of the EDI, that equity aspect of it. I think if we go from a place of everyone deserves what they say they need to be where they want to be, not where we as a society has decided this is the ideal, this is what everyone wants to be, it gives people a chance to stand up and say, hey, I'm not getting what I need to be where I want to be. So if we work on a place of equity versus the equality we've been pushing for so long, people are then able to rise up and say, my voice hasn't been heard because I haven't been safe enough to identify myself. Now that I know you're willing to work with me when I say I need help, the way I say I need it, to be at the end that I say I need to be, people who have not already been identified would willingly identify themselves, which creates this more of this wave of more people showing up and feeling representation throughout the community.
Have an internet question. What kind of resources and strategies do you think would help the allies of equity deserving groups be more involved and engaged in diversity competence training?
Oh, I think that's a great one. I think a lot of the work actually exists out there. The consultants exist, the community groups exist, the spaces exist. It's the onus on the allies or the accomplices or whatever you want to call yourself on your journey to better, going into those spaces, embracing the discomfort of this journey and showing up. Understanding that, one, you might not be accepted immediately when you go into the spaces to learn, to grow and all that. You might get the door shut in your face, and take that risk because it's worth it, but you keep showing up. If you show that you are doing this work earnestly and that you're in this not for the pat on the back of, yay, I'm an ally, but because you see the inequity that exists, you're going to learn. You're going to develop the language because you've been in the space, so you'll know the words. And then you'll develop the confidence because you know it's worth it, and you'll take the risk of potentially separating yourself from people you thought you loved and cared about who don't share the same beliefs and ideals because you see the disservice that exists within those spaces.
And I do love the word accomplice. The word ally is fantastic too, but I do love the word accomplice because I feel like it means action, and you're there with the person and you're doing it and you're learning and you're making mistakes and you're moving forward. And so I love that you said that word as well, because we use that word now too.
And I think come in to build relationship, like come with that first, right? If you build relationship, then you're going to figure out the other things to connect the dots. But if you're not coming to build relationship, then where is the accomplice? Like, what does allyship then look like? And I think coming with the humility, and you're right, it's being able to like sit in your uncomfortability until you find that place. And again, if you're building a relationship, then it changes how you're going to operate and show up in those spaces. And I think it does come from making a commitment that you are going to change the way that you have been conditioned to do things. For most of us who are in places of reclamation, it's because we're reparenting ourselves. Like we're breaking the programming, right? Like I was raised in similar ways that the difference is that I'm Indigenous. So all of the things that I was taught, I had to really work my ass off to unlearn these things because they're not truths, right? So if you can go into also knowing that most of what you were conditioned to learn within different systems is untrue or it doesn't work, right? So it's and it can be hard work, but it's very meaningful. I mean, you will make relationships and connections and it actually feel like you have done something to plant a seed for a forest that you might not actually see grow, but you're going to see it coming, you know?
I had three thoughts. I'm going to try and put them together somehow. To kind of go off what Cole was saying, the idea of building a relationship, I want to tie that to something that Xavier said earlier. We have a responsibility to knowing. So what if we try to build a relationship to our own sense of that responsibility? What do we have to do within ourselves to figure that out? How can we reconcile the things that we know about Newfoundland culture that we've had passed down for 3 generations to know it was on the backs of enslaved people? So how do we kind of figure out that relationship of, holding space for that knowing, holding space for what that does to us internally and how it challenges our narratives? And then the other piece is gone. So one of my life mottos is the concept of demonstration over declaration. And I think allyship, being an accomplice, all of these things, if it's worth saying, you should be doing it, and I know folks are asking for resources and how to sort of accomplish that. But just do the work within yourself and demonstrate it on a regular basis. It doesn't just have to be a job task. It's not just something you got to tick off because you're expected to do it at work. Carry it with you all the time. Figure out how can you use whatever platforms and privileges that you may have to uplift the voices of folks that don't have those same platforms or privileges. and just really demonstrate that in your day to day. Be welcoming and thankful and gracious and just give people room to be themselves. Simple, but not.
But if you're looking for like direct resources, book lists exist. Spotify has full podcast lists. Documentaries are there. It is really, Google is free. You put in your question. ChatGPT will also spit you out a documented list. You put the age level that you're looking for, your competency with this information, and you will get a list.
Thank you.
That idea of educating yourself, like it's not always on us to educate you. Yeah, so there's that piece, like, and I think of like being from Labrador, then there's that piece as well, like as an allyship within our province of how we understand all other areas of our province and how do we ensure that things are happening outside, that urban setting, and how do we make sure voices are lifted up from rural and remote parts of the province. So I think, allyship is also that. It's making sure you're lifting up and bringing in to the best of your ability, but it can't be understated, the idea to educate yourself so it's not always on somebody else who's already trying to, just live within their own identity, because it can be very exhausting.
Hi, my name is Angie. Been here a couple of times before at the mic. Thanks for the shout out earlier, Leah and Cole. Long time no see. Well, I still can't see you. I'm blind now, but
I appreciate the sentiment.
yeah. I'm very glad to hear your voice in this panel. Like I said, this has been, as a multi-disabled individual and now a patient advocate for NL Health Services, my journey actually started with you, Cole. So I'm sorry, you're taking all the blame for me being able to be in this space, to be my own advocate. I've learned a lot from NL Health Services through that journey, but it started with you, and I just want to thank you for that, because that, for me, it was, you gave me permission to say I was able to speak for myself. I didn't know that before I met you, so thank you. Beyond all of that, yeah. Beyond all of that, like I say, I'm a self-advocate now, but I also, I've found my voice as well too within the walls of NL Health Services, and NL Health Services right now gets a really bad rap for a whole lot of things. Some of it's deserved, I guess, because we've got a long way to go to learn. But, the fact that we've come so far in such a short amount of time is people don't get to see the work that goes on behind the walls. And honestly, the people who have become my accomplices are here at this table. And I'm here with my aide that I would never have if not for the accomplices at my table. It took a monumental amount of effort to be able to be here with my aides that I don't get out of the house without, So, to be able to come this far in the last few years, even though it's been a really crazy struggle, and I've got a long way still yet to go, hearing conversations like this happening now on the regular, I'm just so impressed. It's unreal. It's coming from lived experience. If you don't know it already, I'm telling you now, this is amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment here in our email. Good thoughts and thinkers. I think that teachers and schools can learn a lot from the comment about not assuming identity and only assuming one identity. Nothing about us without us. Love the idea of action, not just policy, triangles to circles. Cross-intersectional communication. Schools need to listen more to student voices. If it's worth saying, it is worth doing. Well, we have reached the end, folks. It's been a long, amazing day with so many people. Thank you for coming. Now, before we, get going, I want to take a moment to remind everybody let me see if I get, here it is. So on your tables are little paper QR codes. And if you scan those QR codes, you'll be taken to a feedback survey. All feedback is valuable and important. And when you fill out this survey, your name is entered into the draw for one of those Gardner Center program certificates. So there's that as well. And again, please email us at diversity@ancnl.ca. Any questions, comments, or follow-up that you may have. That survey is probably only going to take 2 or 5 minutes. It's pretty short. We also have some paper copies available if you need that as well. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Any questions, interested in training, having some conversations with the ANC and the diversity team, shoot us an email. I'd like to thank our ASL interpreters, Sheila Keats and Heather Crane, and our French interpreters, Susan Crocker and Claire Wilkshire, for being here today. I'd like to thank the St. John's Mi'kmaq Women's Circle, Anna and Eric and Baraka for performing today. You're all very talented. Thank you. And I would like to thank everyone again for joining in person and to our virtual audience. Thank you. Thank you to all of our funders, and thank you to Keene College for providing lunch to our ANC students that were attending virtually. And thank you to the Amera Center for having us today, and to Red Oak for catering. So, thank you. Thank you for coming. Let's give everybody and yourselves a round of applause.